There are names that history speaks loudly, carved into stone and shouted across centuries. And then there are lives that, when listened to closely, speak more softly than we expect. Julius Caesar is remembered as a conqueror, a ruler, a turning point. But before the banners, before the triumphs, before the knives in the dark, there was a man moving through uncertainty, shaped by fear, patience, and a quiet hunger to be seen. His life was not a straight path toward glory. It was a long night of waiting, of watching power slip through other hands, of learning when to step forward and when to remain still. This is not the story of a legend standing tall in marble. It is the story of a human heart beating beneath armor, searching for meaning in a world that rewarded ambition but punished vulnerability. If these words settle gently around you, if the past feels calmer when told slowly, let this channel rest beside you tonight. Let history move at the pace of breath and memory, and if sleep finds you along the way, know that the story will keep watch quietly until you return. The night around Rome was rarely quiet, even when the streets slept. Stone held memory, and memory had a way of whispering. Julius Caesar was born into those whispers, into a city that no longer trusted its own reflection. The Republic still called itself eternal, but its heart beat unevenly, strained by ambition and fear. Senators spoke of balance while sharpening knives behind closed doors. Generals returned from distant wars richer than the state that sent them. And in the narrow spaces between honor and survival, a boy opened his eyes and learned, very early, how fragile stability could be. Caesar's family name carried old prestige but little safety. They were noble, yes, but not powerful enough to be protected when tides turned. His childhood unfolded during years when loyalty shifted daily and yesterday's hero could become tomorrow's criminal. He watched processions pass through the city, triumphs celebrated loudly, only to hear, months later, of exile or execution whispered behind shutters. In such a world, childhood was brief. Awareness arrived early, like a hand on the shoulder reminding him to stay alert. Loss came quietly, as it often does. His father died while Caesar was still young, leaving behind absence rather than explanation. There was no grand farewell, no heroic ending, just a sudden gap where guidance had been. In Rome, grief was not indulged for long. Life pressed forward, and so did expectation. Caesar learned to carry weight without ceremony, to hold uncertainty without complaint. It was a skill that would serve him long after innocence faded. His mother, Aurelia, became his anchor. Strong-willed and observant, she understood Rome better than most men who claimed to rule it. Through her, Caesar learned discipline, patience, and the value of silence. She taught him that words could wound more deeply than blades, and that timing mattered as much as courage. In her presence, ambition was not encouraged loudly, but neither was it denied. It was shaped, tempered, taught to wait. Rome itself became his classroom. The Forum was not merely a place of speeches. It was a living lesson in power. Caesar watched crowds swell and thin, saw how easily emotion could be stirred, how quickly it could turn. He noticed who listened and who pretended not to. He learned that authority did not always sit with the loudest voice, but often with the calmest gaze. These were not lessons written down. They were absorbed, slowly, through observation and restraint. Then came Sulla. His name settled over Rome like a shadow at dusk. Civil war tore through the Republic, and when it ended, peace did not follow. Instead came lists, names written down, lives reduced to ink and decree, enemies of the state, declared by those who held power long enough to define it. Caesar's family ties placed him in danger, not because of what he had done, but because of who he was connected to. In Rome, that was often enough. Refusal became his first act of quiet defiance. Ordered to divorce his wife to prove loyalty to the regime, Caesar said no. It was not a loud refusal. It was firm, measured, and deeply personal. He chose uncertainty over obedience, exile over safety. The choice cost him position, inheritance, and protection. But it preserved something inside him that could not be restored once broken. Integrity, once surrendered, rarely returns unchanged. Exile was not dramatic. There were no farewell crowds, no noble speeches. Caesar simply left, slipping beyond the city that had shaped him, carrying little more than his name and resolve. On the road, the world felt larger and less forgiving. Rome's marble certainty gave way to rough terrain and foreign skies. Danger was no longer political alone. It was physical, immediate, and indifferent. Captured by pirates during his travels, Caesar encountered power stripped of ceremony. These men did not care about Rome, titles, or lineage. They cared about ransom and leverage. Yet even here, Caesar's presence shifted the balance. He spoke to his captors not as a victim, but as an equal. He joked with them. He corrected them when they asked too little for his ransom. There was something unsettling in his calm, something that hinted at a future neither he nor they could yet fully imagine. When he was freed, he did not forget. Memory for Caesar was never passive. He returned, gathered forces, and punished the pirates as he had promised. It was not cruelty. It was consistency, a lesson learned and applied. Power, he understood, must be credible. Words must be matched by action, or they become noise. As the years passed, the threat from Sulla faded, and Caesar was allowed to return to Rome. But he did not return unchanged. Exile had narrowed him and expanded him all at once. He had seen what it meant to be vulnerable, to stand without protection, to rely on presence rather than position. Rome welcomed him back cautiously, unsure of what he had become in absence. And so, as the night deepened over the city, Caesar stepped once more into its crowded streets, carrying with him patience sharpened by danger and ambition tempered by restraint. The boy who had watched power from a distance was gone. In his place stood a young man who understood that survival was not the opposite of greatness, but often its beginning. Rome greeted Caesar with familiarity and suspicion, the way it greeted anyone who had been gone long enough to change. The city remembered faces, but it trusted patterns more than people. Caesar moved through its streets quietly at first, observing how little had shifted and how much had hardened. Old rivalries still breathed beneath polite greetings. New alliances wore the same ancient disguises. Power had survived the violence of Sulla's reign, but it had not healed from it. It had simply learned to hide its scars. Caesar chose his steps carefully. He did not rush toward command or clamor for attention. Instead, he turned to words. Oratory became his doorway back into influence, a space where memory, emotion, and logic could be woven together with grace. He studied rhetoric with discipline, understanding that in Rome, persuasion often mattered more than force. A blade could silence a man, but a sentence could move a crowd, and crowds, once stirred, could reshape destinies. He spoke for those without voices, or at least he spoke as if he did. In courtrooms and public gatherings, he positioned himself as a defender of dignity, an enemy of excess, a reminder of old Republican virtues that many claimed to honor and few truly practiced. His speeches were not loud. They were deliberate. They left room for listeners to feel clever for agreeing with him. This subtlety earned him attention without alarm, admiration without immediate threat. Debt followed him like a shadow. Caesar lived beyond his means, not out of carelessness, but intention. He understood that visibility required investment, and investment often required risk. Lavish games, public generosity, carefully staged moments of charm and humility all came at a cost. The numbers mounted quietly, but so did his reputation. To many, he became a symbol of promise, a man who seemed to believe in Rome even when Rome struggled to believe in itself. Yet ambition never slept. Beneath the polish and patience, it waited. Caesar sought military command not for glory alone, but for legitimacy. Rome trusted success on distant fields more than words spoken at home. When the opportunity came to serve abroad, he accepted with relief that bordered on hunger. The provinces offered something Rome could not: space. Space to act without constant scrutiny. Space to define himself through decision rather than debate. In Spain, he tasted command and found it familiar. Leadership did not weigh on him the way others feared it might. Instead, it settled naturally, like a mantle he had been preparing to wear all along. He learned the rhythms of soldiers, the importance of shared hardship, the quiet power of standing beside men rather than above them. Loyalty, he discovered, grew strongest where respect replaced fear. Victories followed, modest but meaningful. Caesar did not return triumphant in the grand sense, but he returned proven. The city received him differently this time. There was caution still, but also recognition. He had crossed the threshold from potential to presence. Rome could no longer afford to overlook him. And yet, as the night closed around the city once more, Caesar felt the familiar unease of a man standing between worlds. He was no longer the vulnerable exile, but neither was he secure. Power beckoned, but it demanded more than talent. It demanded sacrifice, patience, and alliances forged in shadow. Somewhere beyond the lamps and echoes of the Forum, paths began to narrow, drawing him closer to choices that would test not only his ambition, but the fragile balance of the Republic itself. The journey forward promised elevation, but it also carried a cost that could not yet be measured. The Senate watched him more closely now, as one watches a river after heavy rain, uncertain whether it will stay within its banks. Caesar felt their eyes, but he did not flinch. Instead, he leaned into cooperation, presenting himself as a man willing to work within the system rather than against it. This, too, was a performance, though not an empty one. He understood Rome's machinery intimately, its rituals and delays, its love of tradition and fear of disruption. To move it, one had to appear patient, even when patience was the last thing one felt. It was during this season that Caesar began to understand the true nature of Roman power. It did not reside solely in offices or titles, but in relationships, in shared favors quietly remembered, in debts that were never written down, in the careful balance between rivalry and necessity. Alone, no man could rise far. Together, even enemies could shape the world. And so alliances formed, not through trust, but through mutual need. Pompey, celebrated general and darling of the people, had victories to his name but little influence within the Senate. Crassus, wealth beyond measure, commanded fear but not affection. Caesar stood between them, offering something each lacked. To Pompey he offered legitimacy. To Crassus, opportunity. To himself he offered time. The arrangement was never spoken aloud in public, but it reshaped Rome all the same. The first triumvirate, as history would later call it, was not a union of ideals but of convenience. 3 men bound by ambition, each believing himself the cleverest among them. Caesar moved within this triangle with grace, careful not to appear dominant, careful not to seem subordinate. He smiled easily. He listened more than he spoke. He waited. Consulship followed, as it often does when power has already settled behind the scenes. Caesar entered office with confidence wrapped in humility, presenting reforms as restorations, changes as corrections. He passed laws that favored veterans, strengthened his bond with the people, and quietly unsettled the Senate. Opposition rose, predictable and sharp, but it lacked unity. Caesar had learned that division weakens resistance more effectively than force. Yet even as his influence expanded, so too did his debts. Financial, political, personal. Every favor demanded a return. Every alliance carried expectation. Caesar was no longer free to choose only what he desired. He was bound to outcomes, responsible for maintaining the delicate equilibrium he had helped create. Power, he realized, was not possession. It was obligation. When his term ended, the question of what came next loomed heavily. In Rome, stepping down often meant vulnerability. Enemies waited patiently for moments of exposure. Caesar did not intend to offer them one. He secured command in Gaul, a land distant enough to grant freedom, dangerous enough to justify authority. The decision was strategic, but it also carried a quiet longing. Beyond Rome's borders, he could act without constant compromise. As he departed, the city exhaled, unsure whether it felt relief or loss. Caesar did not look back. Ahead lay forests and rivers, unfamiliar peoples and endless campaigns. There, far from marble halls and whispered judgments, he would find something Rome had never given him fully: clarity. And so, as the night deepened and the road stretched onward, Caesar moved toward a destiny shaped by steel, loyalty, and the slow turning of fate, unaware of how deeply this distance would change both him and the republic he left behind. Gaul did not welcome him gently. It rose before Caesar as a land of mist and resistance, its forests thick, its rivers cold and unyielding. Tribes moved with quiet confidence across terrain they knew by heart, watching the Roman legions with eyes sharpened by generations of defense. To many in Rome, this posting had seemed like exile disguised as honor. To Caesar, it felt like release. Here, authority did not need to be negotiated in marble chambers. Here, decisions mattered immediately, and consequences followed without delay. At first, the campaigns unfolded cautiously. Caesar observed, measured, and waited for the right moments to act. He learned the rhythms of the land and the habits of its people, listening more than striking. When conflict came, it came decisively. His legions moved with discipline and trust, bound not only by command, but by belief. Caesar walked among them, sharing hardships, enduring cold and hunger without complaint. This closeness was not accidental. He understood that loyalty, once earned, could carry a man farther than fear ever would. Victory followed victory, each one expanding Rome's reach and Caesar's reputation. Reports traveled back to the city, carried by messengers and rumors alike. The Senate read them with unease. The people read them with pride. Caesar's name, once spoken carefully, now spread freely through taverns and markets. He was becoming something larger than office, larger than alliance. He was becoming legend. Yet legend carries weight. With each triumph, expectations grew heavier. His soldiers looked to him not just as a general, but as a protector of their futures. They trusted him with their lives, and in return, he felt bound to secure their place in the world he was shaping. This sense of responsibility deepened him, steadied him, but it also narrowed his path. Retreat, once an option, began to feel impossible. As seasons passed, the wars grew fiercer. Resistance hardened. Caesar responded with resolve that bordered on ruthlessness. Towns fell. Leaders were captured or slain. He justified each action as necessity, each harsh choice as the cost of order. In quiet moments, when the campfires burned low and the men slept, he felt the weight of these decisions settle upon him. He did not turn away from it. He carried it, believing that endurance was part of greatness. Meanwhile, Rome changed in his absence. Old alliances frayed. Pompey drifted closer to the Senate. Crassus met his end far from home, ambition extinguished in foreign sands. The balance Caesar had once helped create no longer held. Messages from the city grew tense, filled with warnings masked as advice. He read them carefully, understanding what lay beneath the words. Distance had protected him, but it had also allowed fear to grow unchecked. Still, he remained in Gaul, finishing what he had begun. He believed that completeness mattered, that leaving things unfinished invited chaos. And so he pressed on, even as the space between him and Rome filled with uncertainty. The man who would return would not be the one who had left. Power had shaped him. Command had clarified him. The republic he remembered now felt distant, almost fragile. And so, as the fires dimmed and the northern winds whispered through the camps, Caesar stood at the edge of triumph and consequence, sensing that the greatest conflict of his life would not be fought among foreign tribes, but against the city that had raised him. Winter settled heavily over Gaul, slowing the movement of armies but not the movement of thought. Snow gathered along the roads and fields, softening the world into silence, and within that silence Caesar's mind grew restless. Victory no longer felt distant. It surrounded him, written into every fortified hill and subdued tribe. And yet peace did not follow. Instead, a different tension took root, one that no sword could cut away. The men sensed it too. Around the evening fires, stories shifted. They spoke less of battle and more of home, of land promised, of rewards owed. They believed in Caesar not only as a commander, but as a guarantor of their future. He had led them through years of hardship, and they trusted him to lead them back into a Rome that would honor their sacrifice. That trust bound him tightly, To fail them now would be to betray the very loyalty that had carried him this far. From Rome came orders wrapped in formality. The Senate thanked him for his service, praised his victories, and then asked, gently at first, that he lay down his command. Return as a private citizen, they said. Let the Republic resume its balance. Caesar understood what this meant. Without the protection of office or army, old accusations would rise like ghosts. Debts, rivalries, and resentments would no longer be held at bay by distance or fear. The city that celebrated him might also destroy him. He read the messages slowly, more than once, weighing each phrase. He did not rage. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked the perimeter of the camps, listening to the quiet sounds of winter, the crunch of frost beneath his boots, the steady breathing of sleeping soldiers. These men had given him everything. To abandon them now, to step into Rome stripped of power, felt not like honor, but like surrender. Caesar had always believed that fate favored the bold, but boldness now carried a different meaning. Action would no longer be confined to foreign soil. Whatever choice he made would turn inward, reshaping the heart of Rome itself. The thought did not thrill him as conquest once had. It weighed on him, heavy and unavoidable. Across the Alps, fear grew sharper. Pompey, once his ally, now stood aligned with those who wished to contain him. The Republic spoke of law and order, but beneath the words lay anxiety. Caesar's success had become unsettling. He represented not just a man, but a possibility. That one individual, backed by loyalty rather than lineage, could rise beyond the careful structures of tradition. In the long nights, Caesar considered restraint. He imagined returning quietly, accepting judgment, trusting that his service would shield him. But each time the image faded. He had seen how quickly gratitude dissolved in Rome. He had seen how easily principles bent under pressure. Trusting the system now felt like trusting a memory. Spring crept slowly back into the land. Snow melted, roads cleared, movement resumed. With the thaw came decision. Caesar gathered his closest companions, speaking plainly, without ceremony. He did not frame his choice as rebellion. He framed it as necessity. Survival, not ambition. Stability, not conquest. Whether this was entirely true, even he could not say. But belief has a way of shaping reality. When the legions began to move south, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Each step carried them closer to a line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Caesar knew this. He felt it with every mile. The republic he had served was waiting on the other side, uncertain and afraid. And so, as the roads opened and the river drew nearer, Caesar walked steadily toward a moment that would define not only his life, but the fate of Rome itself, aware that once he stepped forward, there would be no returning to the quiet certainty of before. The river appeared almost modest when Caesar first saw it. Narrow, quiet, easily crossed by any traveler who did not know its name or meaning. The Rubicon flowed without ceremony, its waters moving steadily toward the sea, unaware of the weight history had placed upon it. To most, it was only a boundary. To Caesar, it was the final threshold between obedience and defiance, between the man he had been and the one he was about to become. He paused there longer than expected, not from fear, but from awareness. In that still moment, the noise of the world softened. The clatter of armor, the murmur of soldiers, even the distant calls of birds seemed to recede. What remained was the steady rhythm of his own breath and the knowledge that choice, once made, could not be undone. This was not a battlefield decision, measured in formations and terrain. This was a decision that would echo long after his own voice fell silent. Caesar understood the law. He understood the traditions that held Rome together, fragile though they were. To cross with an army was to declare that those traditions no longer protected him, or perhaps that they no longer protected anyone. The Republic had been built on restraint, on shared power, on the belief that no single will should dominate. And yet, standing there, Caesar could not shake the feeling that restraint had already failed, that shared power had become paralysis, that the system he was asked to trust no longer trusted him. Behind him stood men who had followed him through years of hardship. They did not question the pause. They waited, as they always had, trusting his silence as much as his command. In their faces, he saw not hunger for war, but loyalty. They were not thinking of politics or precedent. They were thinking of survival, of the future promised to them. Caesar felt that responsibility press against his chest, steady and unyielding. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. There was no grand speech, no flourish meant to stir hearts. Only a simple acknowledgement of what was being left behind. In that quiet declaration, the die was cast. The moment did not explode into chaos. It settled, like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples outward in every direction. The legions crossed, boots met water, standards moved forward. And with that motion, the balance of Rome shifted. News traveled faster than the army itself. Fear raced ahead of them, transforming rumor into certainty. Cities opened their gates. Officials fled. Pompey, caught between confidence and doubt, withdrew rather than confront. Resistance, it seemed, dissolved before it could take shape. Caesar did not revel in this. He moved quickly, but not recklessly. He accepted surrender where it was offered. He forbade unnecessary violence. He wanted to be seen not as a conqueror of Rome, but as its savior. Whether Rome would believe this remained uncertain, but intention mattered to him. It allowed him to see himself not as a destroyer, but as a restorer of order. Still, the ease unsettled him. Power, when it arrives too smoothly, carries its own warning. He could feel the republic slipping through his fingers even as he claimed to protect it. Offices fell into his grasp. Authority gathered around him. Decisions that once required debate now rested quietly on his shoulders. Each step forward made turning back feel less imaginable. In the spaces between action, reflection returned. At night, in borrowed chambers, Caesar lay awake listening to unfamiliar walls. He thought of the city as it once was, of youthful debates and shared ambition. He thought of Pompey, not as an enemy, but as a mirror, reflecting the cost of rivalry left unresolved. He wondered briefly whether a different path had ever truly been available. But dawn always came, and with it, movement. The war was not over. It had only begun to reveal its shape. Pompey still lived. The Republic still resisted, if only in fragments. Caesar's path now led east, toward a final confrontation that would decide more than control. It would decide memory, how he would be remembered, as a tyrant or as a necessary force in a failing world. As he rode onward, the weight of inevitability settled around him. The choice at the river had closed one future and opened another, darker and brighter all at once. He could not yet see how it would end, only that it would end decisively. And so this chapter draws to a quiet close, with Caesar moving deeper into destiny, carrying the hopes of his soldiers and the fears of a republic upon his back. The river lies behind him now, calm once more, as if nothing had happened at all. But the world beyond it will never be the same. The road east stretched long and uncertain, carrying Caesar toward a war that could no longer be avoided. Pompey had gathered his strength across the sea, surrounded by senators, veterans, and the last formal authority of the Republic. He believed time was on his side. Caesar believed speed was on his. Between those beliefs lay the fate of Rome. The crossing into Greece was uneasy. Storms battered the ships, scattering them across dark water. Caesar himself arrived with only a fraction of his forces, exposed and vulnerable in hostile land. For a man so often associated with bold certainty, these days were marked by restraint. He avoided open battle, conserved strength, waited. Hunger gnawed at the camps. Supplies ran thin. The soldiers endured quietly, bound by trust more than comfort. Caesar moved among them without ceremony, sharing their hardship, speaking little, watching much. Pompey, with superior numbers and resources, hesitated. Advisors urged him to press the advantage, to crush Caesar before reinforcements could arrive. Yet caution held him back. He feared Caesar's reputation, feared traps where none existed. Each day of delay narrowed the gap between them. Caesar's remaining legions arrived in fragments, but they arrived. The balance shifted slowly, almost imperceptibly. When battle finally came at Pharsalus, it did not feel glorious. The morning air was tense, heavy with expectation. Caesar studied the field carefully, noting Pompey's confidence, his reliance on numbers. He adjusted his lines quietly, creating a reserve where none was expected. When the clash began, it unfolded with brutal simplicity. Steel met steel. Orders vanished into noise. The plan held. Pompey's cavalry broke first. Caesar's hidden lines surged forward, turning advantage into collapse. What followed was less a battle than a realization. Pompey's forces dissolved, retreating in disbelief. The man who had once been Rome's greatest general fled the field, not wounded, but undone. Caesar did not pursue with cruelty. He accepted surrender. He offered pardon. He wanted reconciliation, or at least the appearance of it. But Pompey fled beyond reach, seeking safety where none remained. His death in Egypt arrived as a grim formality, carried to Caesar not as triumph, but as loss. Arrival ended not by his hand, but by fear and miscalculation. In Alexandria, Caesar found himself entangled in another struggle, one born not of Rome, but of ambition closer to home. Cleopatra entered his life not as a distraction, but as a force. Intelligent, composed, and politically astute, she understood power in ways familiar to him. Together, they navigated Egypt's instability, securing her throne and Rome's influence. Yet even here, amid luxury and intrigue, Caesar's thoughts returned west. Rome awaited him, changed by absence and rumor. When he returned, it was not as consul or general alone, but as something undefined. Dictator first temporarily, then longer. Honors accumulated. Statues rose. Titles expanded. Each was offered, each accepted with measured restraint. He refused the crown, yet allowed everything around it to form. Caesar enacted reforms quickly. Debt relief, calendar reform, citizenship expansion. These acts were practical, forward-looking, deeply necessary. Rome benefited. The people approved. Yet beneath the surface, unease grew. Senators who had survived the war felt increasingly irrelevant. Power concentrated quietly, efficiently. The republic still existed in name, but its heartbeat weakened. Caesar sensed this tension, though he did not fully grasp its depth. He believed results would justify authority, that stability would soothe fear. He underestimated how deeply tradition anchored Roman identity. To many, his success itself felt threatening. As night settled over Rome, Caesar often walked alone through familiar streets. He had won everything he sought, yet victory felt incomplete. The city he loved no longer felt secure. Loyalty had become conditional. Praise sounded rehearsed. He wondered briefly whether peace could ever follow absolute control. The shadows lengthened. Whispers moved through corridors. Trust narrowed. The world Caesar had reshaped now watched him closely, measuring not his achievements, but his intentions. And so this section fades with Rome outwardly calm, inwardly restless, and Caesar standing at its center, powerful beyond measure, yet unknowingly closer to danger than ever before. The final months unfolded quietly, as endings often do. There were no storms in the streets, no sudden alarms. Rome breathed as it always had, busy and confident, unaware that something fragile was beginning to fracture beneath its calm surface. Caesar continued his work with steady focus. He planned campaigns eastward, spoke of Parthia, of borders yet to be secured, of glory deferred but not abandoned. The future, to him, still felt wide. Yet around him, the atmosphere had changed. The Senate met, but its voice carried less weight. Old rituals continued, but they felt hollow, like echoes repeating long after their meaning had faded. Caesar did not silence these traditions. He allowed them to exist, believing that time would reconcile form with reality. In doing so, he misjudged how deeply fear can root itself in men who feel forgotten. The conspirators did not see themselves as villains. That is what made them dangerous. They spoke the language of duty, of freedom, of the Republic's soul. They told one another that Caesar had gone too far, that Rome was slipping into monarchy beneath the soft cover of reform. Each meeting hardened their resolve, turning doubt into purpose. Brutus listened more than he spoke. His conflict was private, profound. Caesar trusted him completely. Warnings came, as they always do. Anonymous notes, nervous glances, a soothsayer's voice cutting briefly through the crowd. Caesar heard them all and dismissed them gently. He had survived too much to believe fate would strike so simply. Besides, to show fear now felt beneath him. Courage, even misplaced, had carried him this far. On the morning of the Ides of March, the air felt ordinary. Caesar woke slowly, troubled by uneasy dreams he did not name. Calpurnia begged him to stay home, shaken by omens she could not explain. For a moment he wavered. Then Decimus arrived, calm and persuasive, reminding him of duty, of appearances, of the Senate waiting. Caesar rose. The moment passed. The walk to the theater of Pompey was short, familiar. He moved through the crowd with measured grace, returning greetings, accepting respect. The irony went unnoticed. He was entering the shadow of the man he had defeated, trusting the city he believed he had saved. Inside, the Senate gathered. Words were exchanged. A petition was presented. Caesar leaned forward to read it. The first blade struck from behind. Surprise registered before pain. More followed. Chaos erupted. Voices blurred into motion. Caesar recognized faces he loved. Brutus stood among them. That recognition ended resistance. He fell without grandeur. No final speech. No curse. Just silence spreading across marble once warmed by sunlight. The Republic did not rise in that moment. Neither did peace. Only absence remained. The aftermath was confusion. The conspirators proclaimed freedom, but the crowd did not rejoice. Rome felt unanchored. Caesar's body lay unattended, a symbol stripped of voice. When Antony spoke days later, he did not inflame. He reminded. He let grief speak for itself. The Republic would not recover. Caesar's death solved nothing. It exposed what had already broken. Civil war returned. Power shifted hands. Augustus would rise, carrying Caesar's name into permanence. And so the story closes not with judgment, but with quiet understanding. Julius Caesar was neither savior nor destroyer alone. He was a man shaped by ambition, loyalty, fear, and hope, moving through a world that could no longer contain him. As the night settles, let his footsteps fade into history's long corridor. Rome sleeps uneasy. The crown remains unclaimed, yet its shadow endures. If these words have guided you gently toward rest, allow them to loosen now. The past has spoken softly enough. The night knows how to carry the rest.